for the school. I would spit balls at the nuns, you know. I was a lefty, and a nun hit me with a ruler with a thumbtack in it in my left hand. And out of reaction, I smacked her with the right. And I thought I was going to hell. The priest looked at me. I thought I was going to hell.
This is going to hurt. It's time for the Suffering Podcast. Some would say that not all men are created equal. Some are born with a broken compass and get lost amongst the wilderness of the world, having a hole inside that they attempt to fill with bad behavior. The path you travel does not have to be the course you stay. Change comes in recognizance and accountability for your own actions. A true miracle is a changed life and the equalizer amongst all human beings. The great Greek poet Sophocles writes, "All men make mistakes, but a good man yields when he knows his course is wrong and repairs the evil. The only true crime is pride." I'm Kevin Donaldson here with Mike Failace, and on this episode of the Suffering Podcast, we have a very special guest. We welcome John Sullivan to discuss the suffering of the streets. John's going to show you what a changed life can do for you, and it's extremely inspiring, but it does get a little bit dark. John, thank you so much for traveling all this way, coming to see us. Another connection through Hoboken.
Yeah, exactly. You know, Stewie brought him in, right? So
That's it. Stewie's the man. Stewie calls me up, and it's, let me see if I can do my best Stewie. Like, hey, bro, I got this guy. You're not going to believe his story. Something like that. Did they do a good job? You did a good job.
Stewie
and the whole Hoboken
that
crew,
whole Hoboken contingent.
Benny Love, and John's a good friend of Jerry Cooney, who is your best friend, isn't he?
Yeah. I went down to Philadelphia. I went down to Philadelphia with him at dinner.
Stay away from Chuck Wepner and any nicknames that Chuck may or may not have with Jerry. He doesn't really care for him too much. John, thanks so much for coming. You're welcome.
Before we get started in anything, let's give a big shout out to Toyota of Hackensack. They help us keep the lights on, and they are our marquee sponsor. We don't trust anybody, but we do trust Toyota of Hackensack. So if you're looking for a car, go to toyotahackensack.com. Let them find you a car.
Kev, they help keep the lights on. Those lights are bright. They really are. We got to thank Andrew for that.
So, John, each week we take a message from our audience. It's our social media question. This week, I pulled this one specifically for you, hearing your story, talking to you so much. And it comes from Tanya M. If you had a time machine, what would you change about your former life? If you had one chance to go back and change one event, what do you think it would be? You're our guest. I'm going to pass this off to you. I'd honestly have to say I changed what I did to my grandmother, the way I treated my grandmother.
How so?
She raised me, and I tortured her.
Yeah, with just going out and doing stuff?
With threatening her, with wanting money, get me money.
Really?
I would break windows if she wouldn't get me money.
Is it like taking love for granted?
Yes.
Yeah.
And what was her reaction when you would threaten her, ask her for money?
She would get it for me.
Really?
She would go anywhere and she would get it. She would borrow it.
That's what I'm saying by taking love for granted, because you knew she was going to be there for you. If she laid the hard hand one time and said,
I abused it.
Yeah.
Well, where do you think that line is? That's a good point. Like, where do you think the line is between tough love and showing real compassion? Because your grandmother, it sounds like she showed you compassion, even though you think you're not worthy for it. But then there's a point where tough love becomes necessary. Do you think if she gave you a little bit of tough love, you wouldn't have done so much?
I don't think my grandmother was like that. I grew up with no parents. My father died when I was 2.5, and my mother took off, and my grandmother would not let anybody touch me, no matter what I did.
You were her precious gift.
Yeah.
And she had 7 kids of her own.
Damn. Irish Catholic. It's got to be Irish Catholic. Yeah. Mike, what do you think? If you had a time machine, one moment, what would you go change? Don't say it. Think of something different. Change your mind.
I'm going to say the day I was born, maybe. Yeah. It's been all downhill from there. There's 2 obvious things, the one that I won't say. And like I said, the incident that we went through, I always said, everybody says, if you could do something different, what would you have done? I said, I would have made a left instead of making a right, because I would have never been involved in that. Changed my life forever.
That's a tough one. Is that a blessing or a curse, that moment?
Yeah, no kidding. You know, you could take it in both ways.
You know, we talked about it a little bit on Instagram Live. That's why I'm saying
it's a curse because of what happened to us, but it's a blessing because of what we've become. You know, and if it wasn't for that incident, you said it before, we've known each other for 25 years. But if it wasn't for both of our incidents,
happening so close to each other,
we would have never been in this studio together.
That's right. So there's good that comes out. There's always that light. It's just it's so dark you can't see it at the time.
Yep.
You know,
but they say when you're going through that darkness, there's always someone standing next to you, but it's so dark you can't see that person.
But they got night vision on. I've made so many mistakes in my life.
I mean, like I said before, we could make a whole episode out of this.
I don't, you know, one that obviously when I bullied Jay Aponte when I was in 7th and 8th grade, because I always felt bad about that. If I had a time machine, I would like to get myself directly after my shooting. For the main reason saying, take it easy on your wife. I tortured my wife. I mean, I tortured her because I wasn't right. You know, it wasn't what she did so much. Every wife, you know, pushes your buttons here and there, but she didn't do it intentionally. She's a very kind woman. But I treated her so poorly. I would just want to have 5 minutes with myself saying, take it easy on her because you don't know what's happened to you. How do you expect her to know what's happening to you? I don't know whether it would have changed my behavior, it would have changed, but at least it would have given me, it wouldn't have damaged her so much because I know my incident damaged her. Yeah.
Aren't there times of like you just look back and you want to smack yourself in the face for saying like, why were you such a fucking asshole at that point?
Why do you do it? I mean, I'm sure you had.
You know, my grandmother, she did everything she could for me.
Yeah.
She sent me to Catholic schools, and I was kicked out of every Catholic school in my neighborhood. I was. St. Stephen, St. Jean, St. John, St. Joseph, St. Vincent. I was kicked out. Yeah.
You're running out of saints.
Yeah, exactly.
And then
you notice they're all Hoboken, like, you know, like all Italian names.
Oh, yeah.
and she would work 3 jobs to send me to these schools because we were on welfare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you turn around and you look at yourself when you were younger and you say, kid, don't you see what people are sacrificing? It's, you know, unfortunately, young people are very it's not their fault. They're very selfish people. They think of the world just wrapped around their own head, and they're not looking at what people are doing in order to provide for them or do for them, or if it's in their best interest. All they're looking about is how is this going to benefit me? It's not they don't do it purposely.
You know, I say all the time though, life should be lived in reverse.
Oh yeah.
You're born in diapers, you die in diapers, right? So why not start from the day you died? You wouldn't make those mistakes through your life.
Yeah.
You'd know better by the time you were a teenager.
You know, it was the streets that did it to me. You know, my grandmother did the best she could. You know, and once I got involved with the guys that were older than me and we started doing the drugs, it was all over.
Tanya, thank you so much for sending that question in. Keep sending in your questions. We're going to try to get them on the air. Thank you. I mean, that was a fun one.
Yeah. Like I said, we could have went all day with that.
You know, other than we could have gone for the low-hanging fruit and say, hey, listen, I would have bought stock in Apple in the late 70s or IBM or something like that.
But when you asked that question, I was going to say, do you mean like starting today or through my life?
Or I got yesterday's lottery numbers or anything, but that doesn't really change. I don't know if money's really the answer to anything. So, John, you're a New York guy. You lived a really incredible life from what you've told me so far. But where'd you grow up?
I grew up in on the Upper East Side of Yorkville in the 70s, 80s, 90s. It's called Germantown. Some people know it as Yorkville. And
Residents know it as Yorkville.
I grew up with, living with my grandma. She did the best she could. But she would go to sleep at 9 o'clock at night, and I would go down the fire escape and out and around and hang out in the corner, the corner of the schoolyard and with the older guys.
Well, you had mentioned that your father died very, very young.
Yeah, when I was 2.5.
Now, where was your mother?
My mother took me and my sister and dropped me and my sister at my grandmother's, her mother, and she took off. And I never saw her again for probably till I was about 15 or 16 years old.
Really? And
when you saw her 15, did she say why she did it or anything? Did you make amends with her? Or?
I wanted nothing to do with her.
Really?
I didn't even want to look at her.
Yeah. Really? You were.
I was very angry.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to go to school and Father's Day, Mother's Day, and I get made fun of. They'd make fun of me, because my grandmother would be there all the time.
How old were you when you got dropped off?
2.5, and my sister was 2.
Wow. So you didn't even really know your mother.
My sister was like maybe 1.5. My sister's like 13 months younger than me.
True Irish twins right there. But, you know, your grandmother was your grandfather around?
No, he wasn't.
Yeah. Now, your grandmother was all of a sudden saddled with these two very, very young children. What was her reaction? Did you ever sit and talk to her and say, you know, what was it like? What do I do now? No.
I was so angry that I didn't want to talk to anybody. It was just, you know.
You think the anger from your mother, you took it out on your grandma?
I think the anger from not having a father, not having parents. And, you know, they told my grandmother when I was about 5 or 6 years old, she had about a year to live.
Wow.
And she lived another 20 years.
You know, it's a funny statistic. So they say 70 to 80% of incarcerated people in this country come from a fatherless home.
Yeah.
That's the statistic. There is credence to that because of that anger buildup. Your father and it's a necessary thing to have parents because they are there to teach you life lessons, to let you off the leash a little bit, but also to reel you back in when you need it. And not having that, what did it do to your psyche on that? Besides anger, how else did this come out?
I just was defiant against anything and everything. You know, I didn't want to go to school. Never wanted to go to school.
What age did all this start?
12, 13, you know. And then my uncles and aunts would keep me home on the weekends to serve them their Schaefer and their Budweiser and their 7 and 7s. And like a good 13-year-old, I would take sips. And I would, you know, get
one for you, one for me.
And then 6 months later, I was in the card game drinking full beers. Because back then in 73, 74, you get away with it. No.
Well, was it 18 back then for?
No. If you served a 13-year-old today, and they found out, you'd be in jail.
Oh, yeah.
No, I used to drink them with them all the time. Once I got, you know, I'd be in the poker game.
And your uncles didn't have a problem with you sitting there throwing them back?
I got drunk once or twice. I got dizzy, fell down. They put me in the bed. But as soon as I started handling it, they would be the ones getting drunk. And
see, now that his aunts and uncles didn't have to worry about the little bratty kid running around. You got him drunk, you put him in bed, and he's sleeping all night.
Right. So they kept me inside, you know. And, you know, I had my chances because, you know, when I was 14 years old, I was working in a deli on 76th and 2nd Avenue, Eastmore Deli. And George Steinbrenner of the New York Yankees walked in.
Really?
And I knew who he was. And the owner said, "You don't know who he is." And I said, "No, I know that's Steinbrenner. I was a big Yankee fan." And he gave me his phone number, and he took a liking to me. But I was already taken by the street. I wanted no part of it. He wanted to send me to school. You know, he sent money to my house on Christmas Day.
George Steinbrenner.
George Steinbrenner.
I was going to say,
I lived on 74th, 75th, and 2nd Avenue.
I'm going to say, let's go back to the social media question then.
Yeah, time machine. Yeah. He might have kept that number.
Yeah, and he wanted to do good things for me, but I just
George Steinbrenner, listen, I know you're not a Yankee fan. George Steinbrenner has done so many good things for so many people and doesn't want the accolades for it. Like you said, a guy I went to high school with was an Olympic swimmer. He was in his 92 Barcelona Olympics. Marching into the stadium, my friend's father died of a massive heart attack. George Steinbrenner heard that my friend wanted to go to medical school. George Steinbrenner paid for him to go to medical school.
Right. He actually does it he did it for 20. I knew he did it for 25 kids a year.
Yeah.
He would send me to Saks Fifth Avenue with his secretary to buy $500 suits. When the Yankees were playing at Shea Stadium, when the old Yankee Stadium was being redone in 74, 75, I would go there, and the people that worked at the front office would have to call me Mr. Sullivan. And they would say, "Mr. Sullivan, how many are with you?" And I would just take in tons of my friends to the games.
This is not the first time, obviously, I've heard about your friend. I'm hearing this about your reaction to, or your interaction with George Steinbrenner. But how about something as small? We have a friend, Scott Stevens. Scott's a little person. And Scott went to Yankee Stadium, and it was ball cap day. He gets his ball cap, goes on there, and it just unraveled. Like, it just unraveled. And here's a little kid who, you know, remember the giveaway days at the stadiums? It's a big deal to get those things. And most of it was junk. But he writes a letter, a handwritten letter, as a little kid to George Steinbrenner. George Steinbrenner sends him a team hat, like a real hat. And so those stories about George Steinbrenner, I have to believe that although the man was bigger than life, what he had a really good heart.
Huge heart. Huge heart.
And it just takes those people to believe in you.
You know what it was? The anger and the chaos got to me because when I turned 16, 2 days over 16, that's when it really started to go downhill. I was 2 days over 16. I was with my friend John. John was 6'4". He was about 280. I was about 5'4" and weighed about 110 pounds. And we got arrested for doing something bad. And we went to the 19th precinct, and his father, which was bigger than him, came in and slapped him in the head. And he went home, and because I was 2 days over 16, I had to go to central booking. I had to be fingerprinted and go downtown.
As a 16-year-old kid putting in with
that was the first time I would be arrested, and I would get arrested a lot more after that.
So as a 12 and 13-year-old sort of going down the wrong path, what did some of the bad behavior, tell me some of the bad behaviors that you exhibited.
And when I was 10, 11, and 12 in school, I would spit balls at the nuns, I was a lefty, and a nun hit me with a ruler with a thumbtack in it in my left hand. And out of reaction, I smacked her with the right. And I thought I was going to hell. The priest looked at me. I thought I was going to hell.
I see. I have similar experiences in Catholic school.
I wanted to.
Catholic grammar school.
I wanted to be like, so whatever the other people would tell me to do, I would do.
I was going to say, did you do that for attention?
For attention, yeah. Because I would get up in the middle of my aunt's and uncle's house. I would get on the kitchen table, the living room table, and I would start dancing. And, I wouldn't want to take pictures. I wouldn't want to put clothes on. I was, all kinds of attention like that.
Well, it makes perfect sense not having a father because
and a mother at that point.
Who's the two people in your life who are accepting of you no matter what? Usually. Not in all households, but usually it's your mother and your father. They're your rock, they're your basis, the people who believe in you more than you believe in yourself. And to go out and look and seek that acceptance that you're missing from your parent, not to get into I'm not a child psychologist, but it sounds perfectly logical. And how did your school misbehavior translate into the street or spill over into the street life?
Or did street life spill over into your school?
I stopped going to school. My grandmother worked in Wagner's school. My grandmother worked in the school as a custodian. She also was the super of some buildings. So when the truant officer would come there and look for me, she'd say he's not here. But I'd be in the closet or I'd be up on the roof. So she was enabling me.
Yeah.
And my uncles were always beating me. They used to beat me all the time. With the belt or a broom or something. And, it got to a point when I was 13 or 14 years old and I wouldn't cry anymore. I said, I'm not crying.
Yeah, you don't want to give them the satisfaction. Well, there's this story, I think it's Good Will Hunting. His father, Robin Williams is telling the story of his father coming upstairs and he just wanted to beat on somebody. So he had to wrench his belt and something else and he'd make the kid choose, which one do you want? And Robin Williams says, I went with the belt or something. And, the kid goes, well, I take the wrench. Well, why would you take the wrench? Because F him. That's what he said. And he didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing that he got to him. So yeah, that's fair to say. Now, your crimes, while starting out, not crimes, but bad behavior started out minor. When did it start gravitating towards more serious stuff?
I wasn't going to school and I was working in the streets, I was doing for the loan sharks and the bookmakers and,
Were you collecting, running numbers?
Running numbers, stuff like that. I also was selling drugs.
What kind of drugs at the time?
Pot at that time.
Yeah.
75, 76, it was pot.
Well, pot and acid were probably big back then.
Yeah, nah, it was just weed. Weed, always getting drunk. A lot of weed. That was a big thing back then.
You go broke now.
But then I just started getting in deeper and deeper and deeper,
Like how so? Owing people or?
Owing people, I started getting into gambling,
Now, were you smoking weed back then too?
Yes. I only smoked weed for like 2 years. I really didn't like it.
Yeah.
I did it to be part of.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was more of a drinker. I love to drink.
Again, that's acceptance.
Yeah.
But how bad did that get as a young man? You said you got arrested when a couple days over 16. What was that for?
That robbery.
That was for robbery. So it graduated from drugs to robbery?
Robbery, yeah.
What was it?
The robbery was to get drugs, yeah.
Going and sticking somebody up, or
Yeah,
that's all you do?
No, it was not that kind. It was a mugging.
Oh, straight up.
It was a
Theft
mugging.
with force.
And at this time, where's your grandmother?
She's home. But my grandmother was always there because every time I got locked up, when I got locked up, she was down in the court. I was RO'd to her. Yeah. I was 2 days over 16.
She must have been out of her mind.
She didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I was so angry that you couldn't talk to me.